It's a new year and you're wondering, what can I afford to change? Maybe you're looking at losing weight. Maybe you're looking at changing something in your personal life. But what about changing careers? Well, if you're thinking about changing careers, you've got to wonder, how is that going to impact me financially? So today, for this Let's Chat conversation, we're going to be talking about, can I afford to change careers? Questions you should ask yourself. When you're thinking about changing careers, sometimes you're wondering, is this going to put me in a better situation for myself and my family? Is this the right move for right now? So many factors go into deciding whether or not you can afford to change careers. So launching into this conversation today was none other than Shannon Foreman. She is the CEO founder with Wealthcare Advisor at Forethought Planning. Thanks so much for joining me today, Shannon.
Of course, Shayla. I always enjoy our time together. So I appreciate coming back for another Let's Chat.
Yay! I'm so glad to have you. And I was so excited when we were trying to determine, what are some of the topics we should tackle. A lot of folks have found themselves in a different situation over the course of the last year and a half. Maybe they were furloughed or lost a job by other means, and they're trying to determine, what can I do now? And others are maybe in a job and they've had a different way of evaluating that job now that maybe they're working from home a little bit more. And they're like, hey, is this job really what I want to keep doing? So there are some factors that people should consider if they're trying to decide, can I afford to do something completely different? Where do you start? What are some of the questions they should be asking themselves?
Yeah, so something I do that maybe is very different than a lot of other wealth advisors. You introduced me as a wealth care advisor.
Yes.
So a lot of what I do is around the human nature that we have as individuals, because I firmly believe that money touches every aspect of our lives. So when we are starting to make these big decisions, it's kind of that soul check, that heart check, that mind check, that we have to understand. Why are we wanting to make this change? Is it a financial reason? Is it a stress reason? Is it a physical well-being reason? Is it just time for change? We have to really understand why we're making the moves. For instance, I use myself as an example quite frequently. When I made the transition from corporate to running my own practice, I sat down, I hired a coach to understand, was this something that I wanted, or was I running from something? And really it was, I wanted this thing. I had a great space, but I wanted to do something differently. And I think we have to ultimately feel really comfortable in that space first. And then there's like the strategy that comes with it, right? But we have to understand what the why is first, because we could be giving up a lot of things that could essentially be giving us that next step in our wealth or our financial freedom, however you want to look at it. For instance, just understanding what your day-to-day cash flow is. A lot of people call it a budget. I call it a cash flow. We use a little bit of different terminology because, again, when we associate different words with different things, it allows us a different level of freedom. So money kind of flows in that perspective. So we call it cash flow. What goes in, what comes out. What income sources do you have? What expenses do you have to have? A lot of times I will tell clients, yes, of course you have to pay for housing, you have to pay for food, you have to be clothed, you have to have nutrients, right, in your bodies. But there are other things that we might need too, especially after going through these last couple of years. And something I'm very cognizant of is, do we have the right amount of healthcare, mental health, physical health, well-being, preemptive care? Like, are you working out? What are those things that are important to you? Maybe you don't need the fancy gym membership, but how are you going to supplement some of those things? So how are you going to adjust your cash flow? For instance, if you're going to quit your corporate job and go start your own business, you probably want to make sure that you have at least 12 months of living expenses in savings before you make that extra leap, because you're going to be in a scenario where maybe you have this great idea and passion, but who's going to buy it from you? Whether it's an idea, a service, a product, whatever it might be, you have to have that game plan, and you need to have that stability personally. So many business owners end up commingling their finances together before they actually sort those pieces out. So understanding your cash flow is probably the first and foremost, like, basic strategic thing that you should be thinking about that most people overlook sometimes in those conversations.
And when you think about it, change can feel risky, and sometimes people get stuck in safe because safe is, I know how I'm gonna pay my bills, I know that I'm gonna be able to afford the things that feel really important to me now. But in order to change, to create this other experience that in my mind feels fulfilling, I'm gonna have to lose some of what feels safe, what feels comfortable. As you mentioned, maybe not the most expensive gym membership, maybe something that is not as expensive, but if your goal is to get to this next level, you have to decide, what am I willing to trade off for that?
Yeah, and sometimes it's a temporary trade-off too. Like, it's not something that has to be a forever thing, but maybe it's a temporary pause. Maybe you love to travel and want more flexibility with work. I think that's one thing that we've all kind of understood a little bit more in this time of renewing. What is it that we really want in our lives? Do we want to be able to work remotely or have that capability and flex? Well, why do you want that, and how much does it cost you to be able to live that way? The new role or position, if you're not going to run your own business, maybe you're changing careers and going to another company, is that something that they're going to support you on? And then weighing those benefits options, and we can go even more in depth into some of those pieces as well. But it's really understanding what is it that you want, and what is the cost and return on those things.
When some people hear, I need to have enough for 12 months, they may hear that and say, I'm never going to be able to make this transition. But it's realistic and doable, but maybe you can't put aside, as much of your check today as maybe you would be positioned to put aside in a few months. So is it really a start where you are, do what you can with what you have, and gradual in some cases? Yes,
I think a lot of times people start things on the side in order to transition to the next thing. And some people just rip the Band-Aid off. Look, it has to be how much you feel comfortable taking a risk on yourself, and knowing whether or not you have enough to provide for the people that you love. Maybe you have children, maybe you have a family, maybe you are the breadwinner. And so your situation is going to look a little bit different than maybe a 20-something single person that doesn't have as much financial responsibility. And we can talk about the income gaps and wealth gaps, and how some people really just are scraping by and don't have the amount of money to save for 12 months of living expenses to get to that point. That's where you can start to look at, okay, 3 months, 6 months, but then basing that goal of wherever you're going, are you going to be able to break even by that time frame? Or what is your game plan to get to that place, right? Rather than just having that blind, like, I have this much in savings, but how am I going to get to that next part of life? Am I going to take 3 months off and then I'm going to get another job? And I'm going to sit with myself for 3 months and decide what it is that I want to be able to do. Being able to weigh those things is really important.
And hearing that, it sounds like it could feel scary to someone who is used to depending on that check coming every month. There are certain things that when you're working for someone else, you don't have to factor in, that you do have to factor in if you become your own boss. What are some of the things that, if people are becoming their own boss, that if you already are employed by someone, you don't have to think about, but if you're employing yourself, you need to factor in all these other things?
Healthcare benefits is super huge, as well as increasing healthcare benefits, employee benefits. So you look at life insurance, short-term, long-term disability, your basic, doctors, dentists type of health insurance. But then looking beyond that, what are your other benefits? How are you going to pay yourself if you get sick and can't work? That's short-term, long-term disability. Are you going to give yourself sick time? How are you going to compensate yourself in those aspects that we sometimes don't traditionally think about? And my utmost, probably favorite piece is, who's going to save for your retirement? I talk to a lot of business owners on a pretty regular basis, but nobody else is saving for your retirement if you leave corporations who give you matches. And so understanding what is it and how are you going to save? You don't necessarily need to save in the same manner that you were saving in before, but that's where I probably nerd out a little bit and say financial planning is the key to understanding what it is that you need to do and how much you need to save to get to the places that you want to be able to go.
So really, to just start this out, people should get out that sheet of paper if you have to, or go meet with someone and have a conversation that's more versed in this, but where you're trying to go. And then maybe it's not realistic to just say, I'm putting in my 2 weeks resignation, but maybe there are things that you can do in the interim to prepare yourself for once, you're ready to make a leap. Maybe have some boxes you want to make sure that you're checking so that when you take that leap, you're going to be able to land, right?
Yeah. So a lot of times you can go out to your HR website and print out your benefits statement, and that will tell you the cost associated with everything that you have. And then can you go shop and find something that is along the same line? So we both live in Minnesota, and so you can open enroll when you leave a job with a major life event or change on MNsure and find an insurance package if you don't have a partner who you can piggyback off of their insurance plan, which is an ideal situation, but we know not everybody has that scenario, right? And then just understanding how you're saving for the long term. There are a lot of resources and things out there that you can use from the internet, but nothing replaces a person asking you the questions to greater understand what your scenario is and what you want to be able to achieve in the long term.
What are some of the things when people take a leap and they take that leap unprepared and then they realize they're in too deep? What are some of the things they're asking too late that they should have maybe asked themselves before they took the leap?
Yeah, a lot of times we get caught up on the small things of like still living the lifestyle that we were living when we were getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or however often we were getting it before. And so we end up charging because the majority of Americans live on credit cards, and a lot of people are smart and pay them off every single month. Not everybody has that same capacity. And so what ends up happening is you live that savings at a faster rate. And so you don't understand what is that capacity of being able to do, or you take a loan against your retirement, or you take out money from your retirement in order to fund said new expansive aspect of things. You don't realize the tax consequences on different things, or how that affects you in the long term. Because if you're taking out money from your retirement, there's going to be penalties potentially, as well as taxes owed. So a lot of people don't take that into consideration. They're like, this sum of money is available to me, I'm going to take it out to be able to live off of. And then they're coming back and saying, oh, I didn't realize I was going to have to pay this in taxes. And there's not anything I can do to help people get out of those scenarios. Right.
It's too late to do anything about it. You kind of mentioned a little earlier income gaps and wealth gaps. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that affects the ability of some folks to be able to change careers, when they want to, or as quickly as they want to, or at all?
Yeah, so I think we talk a lot of times about the income gap, especially for women. We're saying, women are paid less than men in comparison of dollars per earnings, or, for the same position, just lesser pay. But if we look into not only women, but women of color, as well as men of color, the wages are not similar to white males. $1 that a white male earns versus $1 that a woman earns, or a woman of color or man of color, they aren't equal for the same amount of work. And then we look at households, especially who have been affected throughout COVID, of the higher income earner being the person that continues to work, whereas the person who's making less having to be the person that stays at home. And then you set that person back even more, because in corporate America, when somebody takes a leave of absence or is stepping away from the workforce altogether for several years, we don't qualify them the same because their job as a mother or a caregiver or whatever it might be doesn't equate to the same work experience. And so now they're not starting at that same pay grade level that they were at before. And so now they're doubly trying to make that up without that same experience. And some of this is also covered by the entire wealth gap that we don't necessarily talk about. We talk a lot about the income gap, but we don't necessarily talk about the wealth gap. And I could go back historically to how this all started, but we're not going to go all the way back to how our country was founded, but we're going to go back to after World War II when we start to talk about generational wealth and being transitioned just for the everyday American too, not for the uber wealthy families. But when we return from World War II and the same benefits aren't due to non-white soldiers as they are to white soldiers, and they are able to start a family, purchase a home, and now those homes are selling for 3, 4, 5, 10 times what they were worth when they were originally purchased. That's where we start to see those gaps in wealth as they occur in different neighborhoods, as well as we could talk about redlining and how redlining has stopped individuals from being able to purchase homes. We can talk most recently in the last several decades I've seen, having worked in the banking sector, but just even within the last couple of months, we've seen homes that have been appraised for families of color who keep their family heirlooms, decorations, family photos up, appraised for less when they remove those items and have their home reappraised, with removing any of their family, identification or the fact that their family is a family of color. Their appraisal value continues to skyrocket by even $100,000. So we still have these deeply rooted systemic things that are happening that are providing people not the same equity, figuratively and literally, the ability to grow in those capacities.
Absolutely. And for African Americans, just dating back to slavery, to even soldiers coming back from the war, the opportunities to purchase homes in certain neighborhoods weren't there. And so you couldn't establish and begin to build that wealth and generational wealth that others had access to. So now, some look at, well, why aren't they just trying harder? Well, it's not an issue of trying harder or not. It's if you're starting the race in two different places, then one side's trying to catch up, the other side's got a mile lead, and you're just trying to catch up.
It's literally a head start.
Really, each generation is sort of out for themselves in some cases to try to create what they can, as opposed to being able to leave much for that next generation.
Yeah, and of course we see more individuals entering the workforce and graduating from college, and I'm putting in that what we might call prosperous life or breaking through, whatever it might be. But the reality is the gaps are still there. On average, in the United States, a white family's net worth is double that of a Black family in the United States.
And if we bring that back to our conversation on can I afford to change careers, that question is going to look different depending on who you ask and Absolutely. Where they're starting from.
Yeah, and especially for individuals, I talk a lot about this over the next 13 years. There's a great wealth transfer that will happen, and women will be huge recipients of that wealth. That being said, if you're receiving an inheritance, you have now maybe had the opportunity to have that cushion to make those decisions around, well, can I leave this stressful job? Can I start doing the things that I really want to do? Maybe I'm creative and I'm working in a space that doesn't allow me to do that. Now I have this cushion that will allow me to still be able to take care of my lifestyle or my family or whatever it might be to be able to make this change in my life. I think network plays a really huge part in things too, not being afraid to create those connections with different individuals so that you can create the community that you might need to get to that next place. My aunt always said to me from a very young age, she said, look, it's not about what you know all the time. It's about who you know. So never forget a face or a name or the individuals that you're meeting with. Never be afraid to ask somebody if you can have a cup of coffee or do anything. And also now I abide by the aspect of if somebody asks me for a cup of coffee to have a conversation with me about my career and what I do, I absolutely sit down with them because so many people paid it forward for me. And so I think that's that element of being able to have those informational coffee sessions with individuals to see, like, is this something that I really want to be able to do before I take that next step? And of course, as much as you can save on the side is going to help you make those transitions. Going through our expenses is not something that we normally do. Look, a lot of people used to balance their checkbook and have the little registry and go through and check off everything. But now we function in a space where we are mainly digital. We have our phones. We very rarely balance a checkbook because we're using our debit cards or our credit cards. At the end of the year, or even at the end of a quarter or the end of the month, you can pull your credit card statements or your bank statements and you can start to see where are you spending. And I guarantee you're probably going to find some spaces that you're like, I didn't realize I was spending on Target that way, right? But Target gets me every time. Every time Target gets me. So like being able to take that into consideration and then forcing yourself to save, setting up those automatic transfers so that you can do it, even if it's $10 a week or, $20 a month, you're starting somewhere and you're getting more used to seeing that dollar amount grow. I will tell you, I see a lot of individuals who are even in executive positions who struggle with this. It doesn't matter where you are from an element of your net worth or what you have on paper. Most people struggle with the elements of how much money are we spending. Just because you have it to spend doesn't mean that it should be spent if you want to be able to make changes in your life. I say this often, but date your money. Literally take your money out for a date. Sit with your money, have a greater understanding of how your money works, because your money is going to be a huge driver in how you make some of these decisions. So every week, look at what you're spending, understand what you're making. Heck, maybe even it's that you just aren't feeling like you're getting the compensation that you deserve to have. So start doing some research around what it is that other people are making so that you can be educated, either going in and asking for a raise or going in to negotiate, making that move, whether it be to start your own company or to get another job.
All right. Important advice. Thank you so much. Shannon Foreman, CEO, founder, Wealthcare Advisor at Forethought Planning. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Let's Chat. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.